Hello! We are back here for another lesson. Today we're gonna create the fields that will later be called inside the section we created in the previous lesson. Well, let's start with some thoughts. Apart from the cart button and this little tag, what are the other elements we'll need in order to build this whole section? Well, we'll need an image of the product title, the short description, the normal price, and the sale price for the product. All this data is stored into the WordPress database, okay? And of course, we also need the user to choose which product will appear here. So let's start with this last detail. How do we get the user to choose which product will be featured here? Well, we have some options. One of them would be to use one of the WooCommerce attributes, which allows us to flag a product as featured. Let me go to the list of products. So it is this one here. Do you see it? The problem of using this functionality is that the user could choose more than one product to be featured, and this would kill our whole idea. Another problem is that it is not so easy to get this kind of information from the database. So let's forget about this option. Well, but there's another option. You can see here on the table that each product has an ID. And it's quite easy to see what the ID is. Just hover over the item and you see it. We'll be using this information in our section. So all the user needs to do is type this number in a text box and it will be saved into the database. And of course, for that, we can use our beloved theme customizer. So let's go to the customizer file and let's create another number field. Let's maintain the control in the same section we created previously, right? So since you already know how to create a number field, because we've already created a lot of them in the course, I'm gonna speed up the video a bit. Then the setting that will store the ID of the field into the database is called set_deal. Now, since we are creating fields in Customizer, let's create one more here to control the visibility of our section. As I told you in the last lesson, this section might not be so useful for everyone who's using our theme. So let's create a way to disable the section. For that, let's create a checkbox control. A checkbox control works this way. When it's checked, the value that is sent to the database is 1. When it's not checked, the value is 0, which is equivalent to true in the first case and false in the second case. Let's create this field before the number field, because I think it makes more sense if it's displayed before it. So let's copy this. Let's call the setting setDeal show. The sanitized callback will be a little different. I'll delete all this and then I'll explain, okay? Here we don't need a description. And the type will be checkbox. Alright, and how do we sanitize the data coming from a checkbox? The first information is that WordPress doesn't have a native function to help us here. So we'll need to create a sanitizing function by ourselves. Well, first we have to remember what kind of value are being stored. I said earlier that the checkbox accepts only two values, true or false, which is the same thing as 1 or 0. So the sanitization has to go that way. First, let's create the function down here, right after the add action. Let's call it fancy lab sanitize checkbox. All with underscore, of course, always with underscores. Let's say it's accepting a parameter, which will be the value that the user will type in the field. In this case, the mouse click will determine if the field is checked or not. Let's call this parameter checked. And now we need to make this function return something to us. It will only return true if checked has already been defined, and it will return false if it hasn't been defined yet. We can write all the code using the simplified PHP syntax. So this is what I'm saying. If the checked parameter is set, and if its value is true, then the return value will be true, else it will be false. That all sounds very redundant at first glance, but it's not. All that is part of a few security rules that you have to follow in WordPress. Later in the course, I'll talk a bit more about those rules. Safety first, as they say. I will also leave a link of a page maintained by the WordPress theme review team with some examples of how to sanitize fields like checkboxes and others. We're gonna pass this function here onto the sanitize callback. Well, then we have the two fields we need in Customizer. Now it's time to use them. In the next lesson, finally, we'll start calling all the necessary fields in the Deal of the Week section. So until then, guys.